Welcome to the 7th of 8 workshops that Amy June Heinlein has given for the gift of open source over the last few weeks. This workshop's topic is Drupal documentation guides. A few housekeeping notes. I am currently pasting in a document that Amy June has prepared with all of the links and references that she uses for her presentation. So if there's something that you missed or you want a little bit more detail or a longer look at a certain screen, all the links are in there for you. If you have questions, please hold on to those until the end. If you think you're going to forget it, feel free to put it in chat and we can circle back later. Go ahead and take it away, Amy June.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So you are, well, we're going to talk about documentation guides, specifically Drupal. And I like to talk about documentation guides because, you know, not all of us are coders and not all of us are programmers, and not all of us are comfortable working in the Drupal issue queue. And there are many ways to give back to Drupal beyond the issue queue, and documentation is a good way to kind of get your feet wet. And I know that everyone always says, you know, just start with documentation. I know for me, when I started, it was like, but how can I contribute to documentation if I don't know what I'm doing? It turns out that that makes us the perfect people to give back to documentation because we don't know what we're doing. So if the documentation, you know, skips steps or makes assumptions that you have some of the knowledge, you're the person that's going to catch those. And as that person catching those mistakes and then giving back that documentation, you're helping the next person experience the docs a little bit more clear. Like Katie said, my name is Amy June. I work with Canopy Studios. I am their QA engineer and community source ambassador. I have the privilege of giving back as part of my job. And my favorite part of giving back is teaching others how to give back, because I know it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside to give back, and I want everyone to experience that. I do a lot of different non-code things in my contribution process. One of them is documentation. I maintain several documentation guides, and we'll look at those a little bit closer. I help organize events because giving back to Drupal is beyond code. You know, sometimes providing a content delivery platform for folks to attend is a good way to give back to Drupal. I work with the community working group. I'm a hospice nurse by trade, so accessibility is near and dear to my heart. And so another non-code way I give back to Drupal is I help organize ally talks where we meet once a month and talk about accessibility topics. And I am a core mentor for Drupal contributions. So you'll catch me at Contrib Days at camps and Contribution Day workshops and Contribution Day at DrupalCon events. And I'm a Pantheon hero. I like being a Pantheon hero. They do great things for me and I do great things for them. Things like partnering up and providing workshops like this. But everyone can jump in and be a hero. They provide us with tools to give back. They provide us with roadmaps. They provide us with documentation. So if you're unclear of like what you want to do in the community, they have some forums that we can join and look and see what's going on. So why give back to open source? There's all kinds of reasons you give back. Like I talked about feeling warm and fuzzy. That's my favorite reason to give back. So it makes you feel good. You move the open source projects closer to perfection. You know, you improve the client facing and the stakeholder facing side, you know, so our project looks good when we market it. We improve the code, so it looks good when coders and programmers and web moderators are evaluating the project. When we give back, it helps build our resume quite a bit, you know, and the more you contribute, the more you learn. So a brief agenda of what we're going to look at today is during the slides, I'm going to talk about the documentation initiative and a little bit about some links around that. I'm going to talk a little bit about different documentation guides, what it means to have contributed documentation. And there's a couple of aspects of contributed documentation, and this meaning contrib versus core. But contributed documentation can have external documentation guides attached to their projects, but they can also have internal documentations in their code repos themselves and readmes. And we're going to look a little bit at partner documentation too, because not just in Drupal.org, but we have our partner programs like Pantheon, Orlando, or DDev who maintain documentation revolving things around like setting up your local environment and stuff, and giving back to their Git repositories is a great way to help the Drupal project move forward. And then we have one more workshop after this where we're going to look at creating a patch, and that's platform agnostic because creating a patch, you do it the same way, but we'll look at the Drupal issue queue and make a patch from there. So documentation initiative. The mission of, well, there's an entity called the Documentation Working Group, and this came about a few years ago, I think 2015, and made it as an official initiative in the Drupal project. And part of their mission is really just to make sure that the Drupal project has really good tools and procedures for documentation. You can see here at the bottom, I have a link, drupal.org/government/docwg-goals. This page and section contains information on the goals and priorities of this working group, as well as they archive past documentation tools and procedures and initiatives. So there's a lot of legacy content on those pages as well. And the main goals of this group is to recruit folks. They want to make sure that the documentation team feels empowered to edit and write community documentation guides. They want to manage documentation pages, by adding tools. This empowers people and groups to manage, write, and edit sections and pages of the documentation. And it allows potential contributors to find pages to work on of interest as well. If we have a clear outline, people can find what they're looking for a little bit better. Another goal is for translations. They're working on adding tools and empowering foreign language communities to translate documentation on their sites. And I'm going to talk about localization just a little bit. And then we want to improve the use of it, improve the experience of users who are using the documentation guide. And that means, improving the way it's laid out for accessibility, making sure, it's readable, that there's bullet points and big that we're avoiding big chunks of text, you really looking at that user experience. So let's break down the documentation guides. There are official guides. These official guides are governed by maintainers who volunteer to upkeep these guides. And these guides are really held to a higher standard, and they go through an editorial process. Not everyone can edit these guides. They can make comments and propose changes, but can't make direct edits themselves. And the official guides include things like the Drupal user guide, the evaluator guide, and the local development guide. And we'll visit some of these links after the slideshow. Community guides. These are community documentation. These, unlike the official guides, can be edited by any member of the Drupal community. You just need to be logged in. I'm not sure if you have to have a confirmed account or not, but that's really easy to do. And it's not really subject to any formal editorial process. But what happens when we suggest changes or edit these pages is the maintainers get an email and they can review the changes and kind of have a discussion. So there's the Drupal guide. This is a catch-all guide for Drupal 8.9 and later. There's a developer guide. This is documentation for developers, and it talks more about the processes and the tools and the standards that are not generally specific to any version of Drupal. And then there's API guides. The Drupal API guides provide like an overview of each of Drupal's core APIs. There are contributor guides. This section of the Drupal.org website, you can find information on what you can do with your unique skills and perspectives, how you can give back to the Drupal community and improve the Drupal software through translations, documentation, and the community itself. These are wonderful guides. And we look at these contributor guides when we first get started in Drupal, not only for documentation, but they have all kinds of documentation on like how to run an event, what tools do you need in place, what different roles mean, you know, what you can do at different events, all kinds of really helpful pages in these guides. And then contributed modules has space for documentation too. They have documentation depending on the contributed module. They have documentation in the form of external documentation guides and internally in the code repository itself. And again, like I said, we'll look at both of these. So translations and localizations. This is a broader topic outside of documentation, but there's always a need for contributions and translation in the guides themselves. Only some have complete versions of text in other languages. All of them are in English, but none of the guides have been fully translatable. And you can visit the link at the bottom to learn more about the translation process. And there's different things that you can do as a translator. You can review translations. You can review new translations and update translations by new translators so they can be accepted into that localization system. And you can be a translation moderator. And this, you know, is a role where you review new and updated translations, making them marking them approved or rejected. So if you are fluent in another language, not only do the documentation guides need translations and localizations, but so does our code base and user interface components on Drupal as well. So let's talk about extending Drupal, because there is a difference between core and contributed modules. Core is Drupal.org. You know, that's where most of the code for all the Drupal sites live. All Drupal sites run on a version of Drupal core. What makes each website different is the contributed modules or themes that we add to those, and that's called contrib. You know, contribution for short. And there's so many modules and distributions and themes that you can choose from. And each one of these, and we'll look at a project page, has documentation that you can contribute to. Distributions are downloadable units of code that include core and some pre-configured stuff that like modules and themes and maybe some predefined configuration. The theme is a set of files that define the look and feel of the website. And then a module is PHP, JavaScript, or CSS files. And if there's any WordPress folks watching or listening in, Drupal's version of plugins are contributed space in the module space. So a module is equivalent to a plugin, but the ecosystem in Drupal is a little different, where everything is handed out for free. So you can view all this code base yourself. So documentation guides. There are several types of documentation you can add to a module, theme, or other project. These guides cover the relevant guidelines, teach users how to add help text to the UI through a module, and other ways to ensure that the projects are documented. And this is a screenshot of part of a project page where on the right sidebar, and we'll look at it when we look at the demo, there's links to the project's documentation right there on their project page. READMEs are within the code base themselves. You know, it's basically a document in the code base, but it isn't code. It's usually written in markup or in plain text. And the barrier to contributing in code documentation is really lower than people initially think. The README basically gives vital details about the projects and should include configurations. And there's documentation on Drupal.org on what a README needs to consist of. But if you're looking for work to do in the issue queue, or you want to maybe learn how to write a patch or an issue, contributing to a README is a great way to get introduced as a non-coder, because most of it is just written in markup. And tomorrow when we look at creating a patch, we are actually going to patch a README. So you can look and see how they can contribute back to the code base without really like contributing to code. And then partner documentation. I'm going to touch upon this lightly, but this hub or GitLab pages, there's a variety of, Drupal partners to choose from. You can work on development tools, hosting websites. This screenshot is the Pantheon GitHub view. They have many pages that you can help contribute to. And this is a little bit different process, which I'm not really going to go into today, but this is a way to get back to documentation. This works on the merge request and branching workflow. So if you're familiar with that, with your agency or your contract work, feel free to dive into some of these partner queues. And then, I say this a lot, just make sure that you use your skill set, provide help with the documentation pages on things that you know about, follow your interests. If you're into development tools, go to those tooling pages. If you attend events or an event organizer, hone in on those community pages on how to organize events. And then, it's really fun when you work on projects that you're excited about. So follow your passions, and most importantly, have fun. So that is the slide deck. Like I said, we just sort of touched upon everything, but now I want to go into like the pragmatic part of looking at the different guides and really showing folks how straightforward, I'm not going to use the word easy because easy is relative, but how straightforward it is to give back to documentation. And I have some pages already selected that we're going to look at for brevity. And I mention this a lot in my presentations, is sometimes finding something to work on is the hardest part. So with documentation, what I like to do is an organic approach to documentation is as I'm reading things, because I'm continually learning. That's a tongue twister. So I read documentation a lot because it's important to me to find the methods myself and try to find it out on my own first. And as I go through documentation pages and I find errors or typos or, missing steps, I contribute right then and there. Or if I don't have the time, I put, I collect that link and I put it in a doc to save for later. Because there's really no better time than the present to kind of jump in and help out with those things. But I do find like working through these pages organically is kind of the best way to do it. So, we're going to look at some of these slides, and we're going to look at some contributed modules. We're going to look at a project page and see where to go to find the documentation on the project page. And this is good resourcing just to know, like if you need some extendability on your website, you can kind of look at this page and see what all the components are. And then we're going to look at some of the guides too as well. And we're going to make an edit to a guide, and we'll talk about how straightforward that is. So this is sort of the central page, Drupal.org/documentation. And you can see here in the sidebar, they have the list for official guides, they have the community guides, and they have the API references. So this getting started page is a great place to kind of find your interest. You can kind of scan through here and look and see like, oh, I love setting up local environments. I would love to, contribute to the local development guide. There's the community guide, you've got all kinds of different things that you can work on. Is multilingual your passion? There's a guide for that. Security, accessibility, themes, extensions. This is a great page to kind of like collect your thoughts and like kind of see what's out there. And I advocate like just kind of like clicking through some of these and doing bumper cars too. That's a good way to like organically go through the documentation. There's the developer guide, poser, usability testing, development tools. It talks a little bit about Git. And then there's the Drupal API guides. It really talks about all of those core APIs that are in Drupal. You can go down and see the, if we go here, what does this do? Drupal.org documentation. So this is about how to use Drupal.org itself. There's all different aspects of Drupal.org. It's not just the issue queue. You've got user accounts, you have content, you have marketplace, you have trainers. So this is a guide that sort of, if you're new to Drupal.org, or if you want to like discover some ways to help, this is a good page to go through. You can see on the side here that there's a list of guide maintainers. It's really easy to request access to be a guide maintainer. Usually it just means asking, if you want to be a maintainer, it gives you a little bit higher privileges. Some of these, go through that more editorial process, so you do have to be a maintainer versus, just a confirmed account. I help on a project called Simply Test Me. It's a tool that helps lower the barrier to Drupal contributions by providing a browser-based testing environment or evaluation for Drupal. And we have a project page. So this is that project page I was talking about. You can find one for meta tag. You can find one for bootstrap paragraphs. You can find one for New Relic. But I'm using this one because it has a couple of really handy guides to it. So when you navigate this project page, some of your buttons are going to be a little bit different than mine. You might not see an outline or an edit button, but there's this project page here, and it gives a little bit of information about the project. But this is where the power is in this right sidebar. It has a lot of valuable information. Here's a link to the issue queue, which we're not going to do today. But here's a block here on documentation. So there is documentation on Simply Test Me. There's an external documentation guide as well as a reference guide. And we're just going to kind of open these to kind of see what they're about. So if we go here, we have, a Simply Test Me page. You can see that there's an edit button here, which is really nice, So if you select this, this is how you would update this page. It's a matter of selecting the dropdown. You can start a discussion. Again, some of these buttons are going to be a little bit different for some folks because I'm an admin of this page, but you can see that you select a dropdown and you can see the choices you have. You can start a discussion on the page. Say you want to provide a different link here, you would, select this discussion page. You want to add a page. So if we click on this discussion page, it opens up a page slowly. It's a good time for a drink of water. Where basically you have an editor where you can suggest improvements. So a lot of these pages that you navigate to, say you find you want to break up the text a little bit for accessibility, or you want to create a different heading structure for accessibility, or there's a typo where something is spelled wrong or the grammar is, just off the wall. You select that Discuss tab and you can give some suggestions. My recommendation is to be very specific. If there is a typo, copy that line from the documentation page and paste it here and suggest an improvement too. People who maintain these pages are busy folks. So if you do have the time and you have a problem, suggesting the improvement is a great way to go too. Or, you can join the discussion page, and if you don't necessarily agree with what someone's proposal is, you can discuss that, and it's like a collaborative queue in here. So that was that, the contributed documentation guide. One of the things that Simply Test Me linked to was using Simply Test Me as a project demo. So this is a page on Drupal.org. And again, here's that discussion page. You can look at the outline. You just read through the documentation page, make sure it's accessible. But that's another example of that documentation page linked off of a project. So what I want to do is I want to show an example of how anyone can, we're going to look at a community guide and how anyone can go in there and make an edit. And this is pretty straightforward. Again, I've taken this page, Drupal.org community tasks / triage. It's a community page in the new, in the Getting Involved guide. This is a new guide. I think what it is we're migrating content from the Drupal 7 site onto the Drupal 8 site. And we do need a lot of help. And so this is why I'm kind of focusing on this page is, historically, we have a lot of documentation on Drupal.org that is repetitive. And so the goal with migrating the content to the Drupal 8 site is to eliminate replicated data. So we've had someone come through and make pages and migrate the content. But what we're looking for now is people to audit that content and make sure, because the person who migrated a lot of this content isn't necessarily technical or isn't necessarily a contributor. So we welcome community input on these pages. So when I was going through this page last weekend, I was triaging issues for DrupalCon Europe, and I wanted to make sure that when I was telling people how to triage issues, that we were following the same protocol and procedure. So I went through this page and I was looking, and it's pretty clear, things are in digestible chunks. It follows the style guide. It made a lot of sense. But when I came to the bottom of the page, I noticed this. I was like, STR, I don't know what STR means. Well, it's an acronym. So maybe they introduced the idea of it, previously in the doc. So I hit find STR. Well, that wasn't what I was looking for. No, not instructions, not instructions, not instructions. So the first instance that STR is mentioned, it doesn't define what STR means. So I went through this documentation to find out what does STR mean. And I found steps to reproduce. So I'm not a beginner. I know what steps to reproduce are, but I've never seen the acronym STR before. So I think, so I thought this was a great, because the general rule is you want to introduce what an acronym is before you use it. That way people know what it's for, because it's an accessibility issue. So I figured we would change this and introduce the acronym. And also in this section of text, I noticed he and she. Well, the Drupal community, we like to think of ourselves as inclusive. And he or she is not a very inclusive set of pronouns, because it suggests that there's only 2 pronouns, and all of us know that that's not true. We're not linear like that anymore. So I thought while we were in here improving the documentation for STR, that maybe we could change that he/she to they and be more inclusive to all the pronouns, all the ways people identify. So there's the 2 things that we're going to do. So we have a page, we found something we want to work on, and now the next step is just to fix it. So going up to the top of the page, I'm going to hit edit. This is a community guide. It does not go through the same editorial process as the official guides. So I am able, as just a logged in user, maybe a confirmed user, I'm not sure of that status, but most people are confirmed at this point. If you're not a confirmed user, you'll see a tag on your profile page that says, I think needs to be confirmed. And there's a special queue that you can go to get confirmed status, and you can just click on your avatar, I think, and it will show you what queue to go to, but that's tangential. So we've hit the edit button, and what we want to do is we see the editor here, it is written There's some HTML in here, and that's okay. That's not going to scare us away because we're not making huge edits. And if you're not familiar with how to use HTML, you know, you can copy and paste. You can use the WYSIWYG, and that will do the HTML for you. So don't be scared of the way this looks when you initially get started. I know not everyone is familiar with different editors, but you can see across the top, we've got the basic, you know, buttons. You can do bold, you can add headings, you can block quote, you can indicate whether or not something is code, you can insert images, you can put in links, you know, anchor links and things like that. So, and create bullet points. So feel free to use the buttons in the editor. And if we remember right, our issue was at the bottom of the page with this STR. So again, it's an acronym and we need to introduce what that acronym is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find steps to reproduce. These are in quotes, so I'm not going to use those. But I'm going to find a good place to introduce the acronym. I don't know if there is a good place to introduce the acronym. So you know what we're going to do is we're just going to replace the acronym with the words itself. So we're going to say the steps to reproduce, and the steps to reproduce. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another find and make sure that we covered all of those. And it looks like we have 0, so we're good to go as far as that goes. I always like to double check and do a search to make sure, especially if I'm like replacing a word that's commonly spelled. Might as well correct everything at once. Okay, so we did the steps to reproduce, and now we talked about changing the pronouns. So to be more inclusive, because we do love inclusive language in our community. So we're just going to change that he, she to they. So we've done our goals. We changed, you know, the STR to steps to reproduce. And that's all we're going to do right now. You know, if we had more time or we're working on it a little bit more, we might take more time and like kind of follow through the documentation, but it's okay to do it in steps. So we've made our changes. If we scroll down, there's a revision log message, and this is a required field because what we want to do is we want to make sure that people are documenting why they made changes on the page. So what we're going to say is we're going to say, I changed the acronym STR to steps to reproduce because the acronym was never introduced in the body of the text. I also changed he, she to they to be more inclusive to all pronouns. Okay, so I created a log message, and then you can either hit preview, and this is a nice thing to do if you're a little nervous about something or you're not sure, maybe you wrote some HTML and you weren't sure if it was what it was going to look like. So when you hit preview, it gives you a preview of what the page is going to look like. So if we scroll down, we made our changes down here, and you can see that STR is now steps to reproduce, and that he and she were changed to they. So again, that preview button. So I'm verifying, I think it looks good, and then I'm just going to hit save. And what's going to happen is now the page has been updated. If you want to follow the issue, you can star this, like say someone wants to start a conversation, you know, perhaps what's going to happen is the moderator might get back to you via, you know, whatever email you have on your Drupal.org account and discuss some of the changes you made. Don't take anything personally when maintainers reach out to you. Sometimes in our commit message, we aren't always clear of the changes we made. And they might want to seek some clarification about why you changed things to a different way, or they might want to confirm some general rules with you, that kind of thing. So that's basically like, that's how straightforward it is to edit a documentation page. And I want to look at partner pages real quick. You know, this is the Pantheon GitHub repository. They have all different things that you can look at. Let's look at documentation, because hey, why not? We're talking about documentation. So they have a documentation repository on Drupal.org. They are more than happy for people to contribute to their documentation. And it's pretty straightforward. You know, you open a pull request, you make the changes, you submit the changes, and then the maintainers will update the documentation as they see fit, or make comments on your code or on your documentation. But you can see down here, you know, there's READMEs in every single file. The README shows by default on the documentation page. So this is kind of where you start when you go to GitHub and you're being introduced to a new project. You read the README, and sometimes this is, again, the best place to provide helpful hints for documentation for the next user, because the READMEs for different tooling and different projects should really make it easy for someone to evaluate the project, and make it easy for them to configure it, you know, giving some detailed steps on what libraries they need. You know, you need Node.js, you know, and they provide the command, but say that command didn't work for you, you can come in there and you can make a suggestion that, oh, Gatsby CLI is antiquated, you need to use Gatsby CLI 2, you know, things like that, because tools and libraries and procedures move faster than documentation sometimes, because sometimes maintainers only have enough time to get the code up and not the documentation. So a lot of maintainers are grateful when we provide feedback in the form of the READMEs. So this is the README for the partner pages. But if we go back to the Simply Test Me page here, you know, this is that project page we talked about. Down here, past the documentation guides, there's a browse code repository page. And this is where you can find all of the files that represent the projects that you're working on. So if you select that, what it does is it takes you to their GitLab page, where you can actually see all of the code and all of the documentation without having to download the repository on your own machine. So you can evaluate projects without ever having to download it on your machine. If you know code, you can kind of go through these, but a lot of the changes that I make as a beginner and I talk about is in the README. So you can evaluate the README right here online. You know, they follow certain protocols. You know, there's templates that we use when we write this documentation. Recently, someone clued me into the fact that that there's a specific email address that you use when you're logging into Simply Test Me. So as I browse this documentation for their README, I see that there's credentials for the site, but there's no credential for the email. So this would be a good way to give back to this project, is to change the README to reflect that the credentials for the email. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow during the making a patch. We'll create an issue and give back to this project and add the credentials for email. So like I said, sort of the bumper car way, you know, works for me. You know, how to do a support request. You know, if you're looking for ways to get back to Drupal, there's the contributor guide. Here is all the different things that you can do as a contributor. So this could be a win-win for folks. If you don't know how you want to contribute, you can look at these documentation pages and kind of vet them as you decide what you want to give back to. So if we go to contributor tasks, you know, it outlines many of the things I talk about. You know, there's new contributor tasks for everyone. how to add a screenshot for a Drupal issue. So say you're working on something and you want to do a review and you want to add a screenshot, it goes step by step how to add a screenshot. But say you're using this as your guide, as your resource and your tool for for the instructions, but you can't quite figure it out, or the wording's kind of funky, feel free to go in there and click that edit page and make those changes right then and there. So like I said, as a new person, giving back to Drupal, vetting the documentation on how you contribute back to Drupal is a great way to give back to Drupal. Are there any questions?
No questions from me. I really enjoy the bumper car analogy when it comes to exploring documentation specifically, because it's just so many places you can go.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's pretty straightforward, which is nice, because not all of us read things the same way either. Not all of us take in information the same way. Not all of us respond well to passive voice, if we're getting instructions. So if something's unclear to you, it might be unclear to someone else too. And I want to stress that to people, that that's a great way. If it doesn't make sense to you and you've done it a couple times, or you come back to it and it still doesn't make sense, proposing that change is a great way to give back. Because it's all about collaboration, if we don't, as users, tell the engineers or tell the maintainers how we use their services or product or contributed modules, then they don't really know how we use it, because everyone uses things a little bit different, and everyone has like edge cases. I might have something installed that someone else doesn't, or I'm working on a Windows machine and these instructions are for a Mac. Adding instructions for the tools that you use is a great way to give back too.
I had not thought about the difference between documentation for computer specific or operating system specific.
I don't think we do, because a lot of times most of us use Macs, and there's that assumption that we use the Mac Linux stuff, and then I know we kind of tease like, oh, there's always that Windows person, but it's a privilege to have a Mac sometimes. They're more expensive, they're harder to maintain. And then, we think about people who need assistive technology use Windows machines more than Macs, because the tooling is easier on Windows.
Yes.
Like I think the screen readers are easier and stuff like that. So we have to think about that too, how we use pages is completely different. So, if you're into accessibility, auditing the pages to make sure that they have good heading structure, that the bullet points are broken up. Because like I said, especially right now, everything's just been kind of like bulk migrated and not gone through. So how we documented a few years ago isn't always how we document now, knowing the challenges that people face now. We might not have really paid attention to that in the past, unfortunately.
Yeah, the web has changed so much still in the last 5 years that any documentation that what hasn't been updated in just a very short period of time needs more attention.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, when we do the patch, I think I'll do a non-code documentation patch on a README. That way folks can see like how to get back to documentation in, quote unquote code in the repository. But they don't have to know code to write the documentation. So I think that'll be a good thing for tomorrow.
Yes, I am looking forward to that. And I was just going to grab my notes so I can double check the time for our last workshop of the series tomorrow. Is at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, and that is, as Amy June has mentioned, how to create a patch. So we are going to learn more valuable skills that will build on everything that we've learned. If you happen to be watching this recording and said, oh no, I missed the first 4, don't worry. All of those links are in the forum and the Pantheon community forum for you to find and watch at your leisure, along with the transcripts, because sometimes it's just easier to read.
Right. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much. We really value your your participation in this workshop series and all of the expertise that you've shared with our community.
It's
Have a
like I said, my
wonderful.
favorite part of giving back is teaching other people to give back.
I know it's rewarding.
It is.
I think that's why teachers teach.
Exactly.
Have a
Okay.
wonderful afternoon, and I will see you later.
Okay. Thank you, Katie.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.